Welcome to the Gorgeous Guru Podcast. I'm your host, Day, the Gorgeous Guru. On this podcast, I'll be sharing candid commentary, practical advice, and intuitive insights on life, love, current events, and everything in between. If you're craving real talk, inspiration, and soulful guidance, you're in the right place. So tune in, get comfortable, and get ready to be inspired. Hey y'all, hey, welcome in. So on this episode, I'll be sharing my experience growing up in New York City's crack era. This topic came about because I started rewatching the show Snowfall recently. For those of you who've never heard of Snowfall, it's a drama inspired by the early days of the 1980s Los Angeles crack cocaine epidemic. So as I watched the scene where the main character, Franklin Saint, is introduced to crack rock, I was thinking to myself, this character has no idea what he's getting himself into. Like, you could see the stars and the excitement in Franklin's eyes as he realizes how addictive crack would be. And you kind of see him making those calculations. It's like, man, if it's this addictive, the demand for it is going to be crazy. And you could see that he was really excited about the amount of money that he would be able to make. So unfortunately, I'm one of the people who lived through the rise of the crack epidemic. I was an 80s baby growing up in Red Hook, Brooklyn, in New York City. And I grew up in the public housing complex, which we call the projects. And that's where I was when crack hit the scene. Before going on, I have to shout out the hood, shout out Red Hook, shout out the back, Trip Towers. If you know, you know. So my hood was so bad back in the day that in 1988, Life magazine, yes y'all, Life magazine, ran a 9-page cover feature on the neighborhood, labeling it the crack capital of America. So here I am, a child growing up in a neighborhood labeled the crack capital of America. What I've noticed about this era is that sometimes it's sensationalized and romanticized. Like, you see the movies and the shows, and you'll see how much money it brought to the drug dealers, but what people fail to pay attention to is how much destruction it brought to these communities. Crack turned neighborhoods into war zones, destroyed families, and contributed to the rise of crime and violence. Just like the main character, Franklin, I'm sure there were so many drug dealers who were so excited when they saw the demand for this product. I'm sure all they saw was dollar signs like cha-ching ching. They knew this was going to be a way for them to get rich. What they didn't see or didn't want to see is the damage that would be done to multiple generations due to this substance. So let's talk about the impact. So like I said, crack actually contributed to the rise of crime and violence, which turned neighborhoods into war zones. So I spoke to some people who grew up in, New York City public housing prior to the introduction of crack rock, and I was informed that, of course, there was violence, right? But it would happen more sporadically throughout the neighborhood. So occasionally fights would erupt. Occasionally, people would lose their lives, and once in a while, rival gangs would clash, right? So that's normal shit you find in economically disadvantaged communities in New York City. Crack caused violence to skyrocket. Shootings and gunfights would take place regularly, like multiple times a week. Dealers would fight over their territory, rob each other, etc. I have a few personal stories that I'm going to share that support my point that crack really contributed to neighborhoods turning into war zones. So I remember being a child and my mom picked me up from daycare. My daycare was located at the front of the projects and we lived in the back of the projects in the towers. Some people call them the new projects. We call them Trip Towers. So my mom picks me up and we're walking through the projects to get to the back. And while we're walking, a gun battle erupts, like a shootout erupts. They don't care that this is the middle of the day and that there are parents outside with their kids. None of that mattered. They start shooting, and we're actually in between the rival gangs or the rival drug dealers, whoever they were. We had to run through the bullets to get back home. Y'all, this was a common occurrence. Nobody cared about children. Nobody cared about anything. Innocent people didn't matter. So another experience I had, y'all, which was a tough one and is a tough one to share now, I'm noticing as I prepare to do so, was there was another time when my public school principal, maybe I was around 11 or 12 when this happened. He was walking through the projects to find a young man who had left the school. And he got caught in one of these shootouts, was shot and killed. So this was my first experience with death. This man I looked up to, who I loved, who was very supportive of me and a bunch of other children, got shot and killed in our neighborhood because he got caught up in one of these exchanges, right? And there was so many. This was like a common occurrence, like I said. So my first experience with death was the loss of my public school principal to gun violence. And there was another time when I was outside with my friends, and I don't know if we were playing tag. We were just all running around. So we were in front of our building, and it's a group of us. It was always so many of us because, projects, when you have a project like that, it's so many apartments, right, in the towers that there's just so many people. So a lot of us were just outside having a ball. And I remember as we're running around and playing, I've always been very perceptive, y'all. As we're running around, I remember these men starting to gather around us and kind of like just set up, like positioning themselves. And I remember wondering why they were doing that. Why would they be setting up around us, a bunch of kids? They were doing that because they were setting themselves up, putting themselves in position to murder someone. There was a man outside or about to come outside that they were going to kill. And they didn't care that children were outside. They had a job to do, which was to kill this poor man. So these are the types of experiences that I had as a child, right? Living through the crack era. Crack also destroyed families. Families were torn apart due to the crack epidemic. So people addicted to crack would often steal from their own families in order to fund their habit. It wasn't uncommon for people addicted to crack to steal from their own mother, children, anyone. Like anyone could get it. They would do anything they needed to do to get the money to feed their addiction, even if that meant stealing from loved ones. So I remember during that time, you would hear about people stealing from their family, wiping them out, clearing them out because they needed to fund this habit. Another way that families were torn apart is that women would resort to prostitution to fund their habit, which led to an increase in the birth of crack-addicted babies, right? And these kids will often go into foster care. Their mother can't take care of them. They may not have a father who's in a position to take care of them. And a lot of them ended up in foster care or being fostered by other family members. Parents who became addicted to crack would often leave their children to fend for themselves, right? Because finding money for crack and buying crack became their purpose in life. That's what my dad called it. Because I asked my dad, like, yo, what was it like? Because he was old enough to process it all. And he said that crack became people's purpose. So now if they had kids, if they had jobs, all of that is out the window. Their purpose now is to go get crack, go find crack. That was it. So again, this led to an increase in foster children, right, needing homes, other family members having to take care of kids because of this. It was a mess. So another way crack destroyed families, y'all, is that a lot of people would end up going to prison due to their participation in this epidemic, right? So you had drug dealers getting locked up, you had users getting locked up, and what we must remember is that these were people's mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives. And that is, of course, going to rip families apart. Honestly, y'all, it was like growing up in a war zone. It was so traumatic. And I really, truly feel that a lot of the people who experience this still struggle with post-traumatic stress disorder. Growing up in such a volatile environment would certainly lead to people developing PTSD. So, in spite of the trauma I experienced living through the crack era, I'm happy to report that I still enjoyed my childhood. I loved hanging out with my cousins and my friends, going to parties and all that. So, I still look back at my childhood with a fondness because even in the midst of that chaos, right, and that volatility, I still had so much fun with my friends and my cousins. I want to send some love and a shout out to the folks who survived the crack era and went on to thrive. I commend you for your resilience because as someone who lived through that shit, I know personally that it was no joke, but you made it through and I'm so, so proud of you. There will be no Gorgeous Guru prompts this week because this was more of a story time episode. If you want to comment on the episode, you can do so on YouTube or Instagram at the Gorgeous Guru Podcast. I love to read your comments. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, consider becoming a monthly supporter of the show. All of your donations are a great help. You can sign up at thegorgeousgurupodcast.com. Thank you for joining me today. You could have spent this time doing anything, but you decided to spend it with me, and I'm grateful. I hope you'll join me next time.